YouTube, what's good, you guys? Good back here with another video, and today I'm going to be going over the 7 NFL coaching hires that have happened so far in the free agency slash off season, and go ahead and rank them 1 through 7, starting with 7, working my way back up. This is just my opinion, and it's also a little experiment to see exactly like what every coach has gotten or what they have done in their career and kind of where they're at and how good I think they'll be with the team that they've been hired to. So let's go ahead and hop into it. At number 7, I have Brian Schottenheimer, who was hired to the Cowboys. As we can see, he has been in the NFL a really long time. So you could theoretically put him above other people on this list, but I just think he's kind of an unknown name in the actual NFL world, as it is a little bit. You know, obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of people who know who he is, but I just think for like the mainstream people that don't really know who he is, that's usually a telltale sign to that them not being the greatest choice. You know, someone who hasn't put up historic numbers for a certain offense or anything like that. So, looking at this, at age 24, he got into the NFL. He's currently 51 years old, which is kind of a crazy thing. An assistant for the St. Louis Rams back when they were in St. Louis. So this dude's been around a long time. 1997 was his first year. He's been all over the place. Tight end, wide receiver coach, quarterback coach, offensive coordinator the vast majority of his career. And the last 2 years, he was the offensive coordinator for Dallas, right? So this past year, obviously with Dak getting hurt, the offense was a little bit, meh. Kind of a little bit weird, but the thing is that I'm pretty sure Mike McCarthy had taken over offensive play calling at this point once Kellen Moore left. So that, we don't really know exactly what he was or what he is. He's worked for some good coaches, I guess, Pete Carroll, who is also on this list, Mike McCarthy, Urban Meyer, that's a little weird one. Rex Ryan's not the greatest, but Mike McCarthy and Pete Carroll, he's worked under some good guys as offensive coordinator slash consultant. So even though he is the offensive coordinator for the Cowboys these past couple of years, he still, didn't call the plays, but obviously he was in these meetings and going over play designs and stuff like that, like an offensive coordinator is supposed to do, but he never really had the reins from what I can gather. But overall, I still think he's an unknown. That's why I have him at 7. He's probably the least known of all 7 head coach hires. So I have him at 7. I like his coaching history a lot. I just don't know what he can really bring to the table as a play caller or what he's going to do at the head coach. Maybe he's just an overseer. So everything is really unknown, and that's why I have him at 7. At number 6 on the list, I have Kellen Moore, who was hired to the Saints. I'm not going to put situations in here at all. I'm just going to go based off of the coach themselves and how good of a hire I think they are. Kellen Moore could be higher on this list in a different year. I do think he has proven to be a very good OC at times. Obviously, he was the OC of the Philadelphia Eagles, who did win the Super Bowl this year, obviously. And then, of course, for the Rams in 2023, and then Dallas for 4 years. I do think he had some impressive seasons in Dallas working with Dak Prescott. You could argue Dak's best season was last year when Kellen Moore was gone, but I still think Kellen Moore had some pretty good offenses in Dallas. I know McCarthy wasn't happy with some of the stuff that Kellen Moore did, which is kind of why they let him go and why he wanted to take over. And then with the Rams, I think they, weren't the best last year. They were a little bit, they were kind of iffy, but this year he was known as kind of like a gunslinging type of offensive play caller, and this year he was able to lead a super run heavy team to get Saquon to go over 2,000 yards rushing, along with having the most rushing yards ever in the playoffs. So obviously he can make his play calling go towards the strengths or strengths of the team, right? That's what he seems to be good at, and that's what he proved this year. I think he's still very young. His first year as a coach was only in 2019. So he's still young, but I do think he's had some impressive years and shown some flashes as a coach and as a coordinator in the time he's been a coach in the NFL. We just don't know. The coordinators are always question marks when it comes to head coaching jobs, right? How much can they bring to the table outside of just play calling, right? How much can they motivate a team? Can they be a staff builder at all? How much pull do they really have? And I think the Saints is going to be a tough one, going in with Derek Carr, Chris Olave having concussion problems, Rashid Shaheed being hurt, Kamara is getting older and older. Their offense is definitely, kind of up in the air, right? Along with Derek Carr being kind of mid, he's also getting older, and he's also been pretty injury prone as well. So how they attack this offseason with also being in cap hell will be an interesting thing, right? They've kind of have to do gymnastics around everything there, and I think it's a really tough spot for any coach, and I'm not sure Kellen Moore is the best option. I mean, maybe of everybody that was available, but I could see him having a worse season than Schottenheimer just because of the roster he's working with. But I'm guessing we'll see strides in the offense this next year for the Saints, especially, maybe not, because I think Kubiak was pretty good for them this year. I don't remember where Kubiak went, but I do think that they could be better a little bit if they lean heavy on Kamara. They go get some offensive line help in the draft and maybe a running back to help with Kamara as well. So maybe we'll see a more run-heavy Saints team, especially to give... that's how the Saints were so good in the first 2 weeks, right? A lot of running, a lot of play action, bomb, deep shots, is how they got to be as good as they were the first 2 weeks. So maybe Kellen Moore leans on that a little bit, but overall I think he's the 6th best coach so far. At number 5, I have Liam Cohen Duval. Everybody knows about that meme, obviously. But as far as his coaching history goes, he's been around since 2010, working with college teams, obviously, and then his first year in the NFL was 2018 as an assistant wide receiver coach with the Rams for 2 years, and then he started working with quarterbacks, as you can see, obviously, and then went back to college, went back to the Rams, went back to college, and then this past year, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers took a chance on him, and and Baker had his best season ever with Liam Cohen as his offensive coordinator. I believe, unless the stats changed, Baker Mayfield has the most passing touchdowns over the past 2 years, other than over every other quarterback in the NFL, something like that. So Liam Cohen obviously has put a spark in that team. Obviously, their offensive line was one of the top 3 in the NFL as far as that goes. Baker had all day. Their run game was really good. With Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Rachaad White, not the best runner, but Bucky Irving coming in and helping that out was really good, and he's behind a really good offensive line. Baker had a lot of time in the pocket to do what he wanted to do. He's a good gunslinger. He's going to go work with Trevor Lawrence now. Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback, obviously. He's had some struggle years the past couple years, but he's a good talent, right? He's going into a position where he can work with a good, talented quarterback who's had some struggle, in the past year. So if he can kind of do what he did with Baker and get that offensive line revamped, work with ETN a little bit, get the run game going, make life easier. Brian Thomas Jr. is an absolute beast, so you get Brian Thomas to his full potential, and you're looking pretty good. So I do have faith in Liam Cohen as a play caller. Right now, do I have faith in him as a head coach? Like a lot of these guys on this list, we don't know. He's never been a head coach before. We don't know what he can bring to the table as far as head coaching goes and how much of a motivator or staff builder he is. So for all the coordinators on this list, that's kind of the same thing I'm going to revolt back to is, can they be a staff builder? Can they be a motivator? How are they going to be as a head coach? We know how they are as coordinators, but I do think this is a tougher situation for Liam Cohen than the Buccaneers were. I do think he has a more talented quarterback. As far as, but talent can only bring you so far. You got to be able to hone that talent in and, direct it into something that can lead to wins. So I have I have Liam Cohen at number 5. Now at number 4, I have Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn has been a coach in the league since 2014. He was a player in the early 2000s for a while. And now he is the head coach of the New York Jets. And he's at number 4, and his first coaching year was 2014 as an assistant defensive backs coach for the Cleveland Browns for 2 years. Then he started working with the Saints for 5 years with defensive backs. And then the Lions took a chance on him in 2021 as the defensive coordinator. And I think this past year was obviously his most impressive year as a coach. We saw how good the Lions defense looked. Even as they became more and more banged up, they still played really well up until that last game, obviously against the Commanders, when it was obvious how banged up they were, just like couldn't be overcome anymore. They just had reached their limits basically. Aiden Hutchinson looked like an absolute beast, the best edge rusher in the NFL this year until he snapped his leg, right? So Aaron Glenn, I think, has shown a lot. I think he's shown more than anybody on this list that's a coordinator to be a motivator for the team. I think with the Jets, the offense is going to be an insane question mark this year because you're bringing in a defensive head coach who might be a motivator, right? But now they're releasing Rodgers. They don't really have an offensive mind in there anymore. I think that defense will be back to its full form next year with Aaron Glenn at the helm, leading everything there. But as far as offense goes, he's going to have to bring in a good coordinator. Their quarterback situation has never been more up in the air than any other team. They're not exactly in a position to go get a quarterback in the draft, right? Because outside of the top two guys, how likely are you to take a risk on someone else? You know, Jackson Dart maybe. But everyone after, and then really Shedeur is a question mark too. So after Cam Ward, I mean, obviously all three of them are question marks. But after Cam Ward or even Shedeur Sanders, how confident are you in any of these quarterbacks in the draft, right? Then you have the free agent quarterbacks. Maybe you can go get Justin Fields. But even then, let's say you pick the perfect quarterback to come into the situation. You need to have somebody in there to guide them and work with them. I mean, their offensive line definitely could have used some work this year. Rodgers struggled behind that offensive line, even with how quickly he gets the ball out. You're going to lose Devontae Adams. Garrett Wilson is a likely trade candidate, which I think is weird. I don't see why they would trade him. I'm hoping those are just like false rumors, weird rumors. But I do love their defense, and I do love Aaron Glenn being in charge of that defense. But they're off. That's only half like a third of 40% of the game, right? Because you still have your offense, you still have special teams, and I think their offense will be by far the biggest question mark and hardest hardest part for any of these new head coaches to come over, like any side of the ball. So I do like overall them bringing a defensive guy for that Jets team because of how up in the air their offensive side is. Because what, you bring in an offensive guy who now doesn't have a quarterback, now you don't know anything about the receiving room, the line, stuff like that. Like, what good is that going to do for their team? So defensively, I think if you can just have like a top 10 defense, like at least you have something to put, lean on as far as your team goes. So I do have Aaron Glenn at 4. Now number 3, this was a tough one. I had it between two guys, and you'll see who was at number 2, but I put Pete Carroll in this position over the guy at number 2 because just of how old he is, and I think that age does play a factor, right? You want a coach that can come in and be around for a while. So him going to the Raiders, I think obviously he's a proven head coach. I think he's done a lot of great things as a head coach. He's been to 2 Super Bowls. He's won one of them. He had arguably one of the best defense ever with the Legion of Boom. So obviously in the NFL, here are the teams he's worked with. And as far as his positions, he came into the league as a DC. Then he became a head coach for the Jets, DC, and then he was a head coach for New England for 3 years, which I didn't even know that. Holy cow. And then obviously his most prolific role was head coach for the Seahawks, which he was there for 13 years, or 14 years actually. And then he took a year off of coaching after I think it was like he was going to get fired, but then he said he was going to step aside or something like that. So Pete Carroll, I think, is obviously the most proven coach out of anybody to get hired this offseason. So I do really, really like this hire for the Raiders, but the thing I don't like about it is it's not a long-term solution, right? Pete Carroll is the oldest head coach in the NFL, I'm pretty sure. And he's only going to get older. So they are also a question mark at the quarterback position, right? What they're going to do this offseason is yet to be seen. I think their offensive line is coming together. I think that Brock Bowers is the best tight end in the NFL right now. Like, if you're picking in a draft, who would you pick to go to be your tight end? I'm picking Brock Bowers. Maybe he's not the best tight end, but he had the best tight end season, and he's the youngest out of anybody, really. So I think Brock Bowers is the best tight end in the NFL. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you have Max Crosby, you have Christian Wilkins, who didn't really perform how you wanted him to this year. And obviously we know Pete Carroll's more of a defensive guy. So I think he can get it figured out on the defensive side of the ball. But the Raiders, they're just a tough place to play, or a tough team to coach for. They're in a really tough conference with a coach who, like I've said a bunch now, is very old. So as time goes on, it's going to be hard to construct this roster in the realistic time that you have with Pete Carroll as your head coach. So I think this won't lead to anything amazing, but I do think as an actual head coach, he's number 3 on this list. At number 2, I have Ben Johnson. As you can see, he's been a coach since 2009. At 23 years old, he worked with Boston College for 3 years. Then his first stint in the NFL was with the Miami Dolphins for about 6-7 years. And then he became a quality control guy with the Lions in 2019, and then tight end coach in 2020-2021. And then obviously his most prolific role is these past 3 years as the offensive coordinator for the Lions, where he has arguably put up the best offensive. He has arguably called the best offense in the entire NFL over the past 3 years. Obviously, you can argue Shanahan or McVay above him, even McDaniel in Tua's best year. So, but overall, I think he's built a great. He built a great play sheet and play designs in Detroit, where obviously they have a really good offensive line, so that's a big part of it. Jared Goff is kind of like, an average, a little bit above average quarterback, I would say. He's probably around the 10 range as far as quarterbacks in the NFL, but he did make Jared Goff look like a top 5 guy, right? With the offense they had there, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a really good wide receiver. They brought in Jameson Williams, and this year they turned him into like his full potential and used him in ways really I think only Ben Johnson could figure out. I have a whole 30-minute video on Ben Johnson and my thoughts with him on the Bears, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I do have him at 2. I do like the age being a big factor here, being only 38 years old, and on top of that, putting up great offenses these past 3 seasons, and now going into a situation where you have a good talented quarterback. Now, maybe not good in the NFL sense, but talent-wise, I think he's one of the more talented guys in the league. A little bit biased here, obviously, as a Bears fan. And then, obviously, you have to get that offensive line situated, because if you don't have that, you really don't have an offense. And then he brought in Dennis Allen. I think he's starting to build a good staff around him. So as a staff builder, he seems to be doing good. Dennis Allen, I think, will be a good DC for the Bears. That's yet to be seen, but he was someone that was able to warrant a head coaching job. So that says a lot, I feel like, right? So Dennis Allen wasn't the best head coach ever, obviously, but he does have Dennis Allen kind of somewhat as a mentor of the head coaching role and kind of how he worked through some of those changes and switches. So overall, Ben Johnson, I have him at 2. I think you could argue that Pete Carroll is a better head coaching hire, but I think the age plays a huge factor when it comes to the ranking here. And then besides that, I don't think it's that crazy to say Ben Johnson at 2. And at number 1, I have Mike Vrabel. I don't think this is a shock to anybody. He is someone who has been a proven head coach. He started as a DC in Houston in 2017. Then he worked as a head coach in Tennessee for 6 years and was really good there, I would say. He's obviously a defensive guy, but he got Tannehill to be the number 1 seed in the AFC, which is a crazy thing. They didn't really do much in the playoffs, obviously, when it came time to do stuff in the playoffs, but I think getting that roster to be the number 1 seed says a lot about Vrabel. I think he's a good motivator, and now working with the Patriots, he knows a lot about that organization, playing for them, obviously. So I am very excited to see what Vrabel can do. Now he has a good, young quarterback behind him as a head coach, where he can kind of lean more on the defensive side and not have to worry as much, I feel like, as he had to in Tennessee. Obviously, he had prime Derrick Henry, top 10 running back ever, and then A.J. Brown was there when he was there. But he had some really good defenses. You know, he had, Jeffrey Simmons was still there. He had prime Kevin Byard. A lot of guys to work with there in Tennessee. And now going into New England, I think they got a lot of cap space. They got some high picks. They have a good quarterback that they just drafted. So I'm very excited to see what Mike Vrabel can do in Tennessee this next year. And I think he's the most proven head coach out of anybody. You could argue Pete Carroll's above him. But as far as age goes, I'll take Mike Vrabel over Pete Carroll any day. And that's why I have him at 1. I think he has the possibility to be the best of anybody. And then you could argue the same thing for everybody else. But overall, going into it, not knowing anything about these guys and what they can do, except for the proven head coaches, I think this is a fair list. But Vrabel at 1, I think, should be unanimous, no questions asked. And this is my tier list for the 7 coaches that were hired this offseason. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm sure you guys will disagree with some of this stuff I've said. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Best one, I was the best one. You thinking way back, you should have kept them. You always question all of my methods. I try to hold you down. I just want you around. I swear that you don't check your phone. I be pulling in the coupe on my own.